Well, welcome everyone. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited that you all are here. I was keeping half an eye on the chat as you were introducing yourself and telling you where you were from. And I saw a couple Pennsylvania, a couple North Carolina. My examples will be North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Maryland. So it's nice to know there's folks here from those states. All right. I really believe that part of telling our history, our family history, telling our story is adding context. Most of you are probably adept or learning to be adept at actually doing the research. You can find a birth date, you can find a marriage date, you can find a death date, you can find a place. But what really makes our ancestors come alive is when we're able to put flesh on those bones, so to speak. And tax records are a really good place to start being able to add a little bit of context to your family, to the individuals in your family, to your family history as a whole. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk a little bit about tax records, where they come from, why we have them. Then I will show several examples of different types of tax records, and we'll sort of tease out some of the information that are in those records that either can add that context or can give you suggestions on where else to look. What other kinds of records should we be finding? So here we go. So some of the types of historical records that we'll be looking at are property tax. I imagine most of us are very familiar with those. Those are the taxes that we pay on property that we own. Property tax differs state to state. Here in North Carolina, I pay tax on my land, on my house. I also pay tax on my car. Other states, you may pay a personal property tax, things that are in your home. Other states may not charge you property tax on your car. So state by state will depend on what types of records there are, what kinds of property taxes are made. Excise tax is a tax that's usually placed on things like tobacco and alcohol. It tends to be a federal tax. So it's a tax that early on helped some of the early colonies raise money for the things that they wanted to do. Income tax, we are all very familiar with. Most of us probably just finished paying or refunding income tax from last year or from last month. Poll tax is an interesting tax. It's a type of tax that was used it was also known as a head tax. So it's a tax that's levied on individuals. It was often used as a prerequisite for voting. It was one of the ways that voting was controlled. The 24th Amendment to the United States Constitution actually prohibits any state from requiring a poll tax. So poll taxes are definitely something we're looking at in the past. And inheritance taxes, money that you have to pay when you inherit money from someone. Now, this is just a small group. There are lots of different types of taxes, lots of federal taxes, lots of state taxes, but we have just a little bit of time to talk. So these are some of the ones that may help us with our family the most. But like I said, you can definitely find other taxes. All right, so the history of some of our taxes. In the 1600s, we were a British colony, and the British taxed colonists. As we all know, that was, part of the uprising. Colonies established separate taxes. So colonies, in addition to the taxes that were sent to England, the colonies themselves had property taxes and poll taxes and excise taxes. They had courthouses and they had jurors and they had road maintenance. They had expenses as a colony. And so one of the ways that they raised the money for those expenses were through different types of taxes. In 1798, our first federal direct tax was inaugurated. You'll note by the date, this was after the Revolutionary War. The government kind of looked around and went, we need some money. We need to figure out how to pay for the war we just had. So they tended to tax owners of land, owners of dwellings, owners of enslaved people. Generally, you were taxed because you owned something. So that's one of the first things we need to keep in mind. One of the first things we need to remember is that taxes were paid on things that are owned, things that are bought, things that are sold. So as long as your ancestors were sort of part of that commerce, there should be some sort of record of them. Now, there are known extant lists for Connecticut, Georgia, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Tennessee, and Virginia. That does not mean that that's all there is, but that's all that's known at the moment. I mean, I'm sure most of you probably have some sort of story about something that appeared in grandma's attic or something that they found in the basement of a courthouse. So when they say known extant list, that just means what's been found so far. Who knows what might pop up? Who knows what will show up in a courthouse somewhere along the line? One of the next interesting taxes that was implemented was the Revenue Act of 1861. So that, of course, was a northern tax, and the primary purpose was to finance the Civil War. Now, part of what's going on with all these taxes is, of course, the government needs to raise money. And we need to remember when we're looking at records, especially things like tax records, that these records were created for some other reason. We're using them for family history. We're using them for genealogical research. But the record itself was created by another entity, generally a government, so either a federal government or a state government, and they made those records for what they needed. So the information inside the papers, where they're written down, the information there is there because it was information that the government decided it needed while it was collecting taxes. It's our job as family historians then to look at that information and sort of tweeze out what's useful for us and what we can make available for our research. So some of the clues that we find in taxes. One of the things to think about is taxes were generally every year. So there would be paperwork in a county courthouse, in a state government house, in a federal IRS, whatever. There will be information there every single year. We pay our income tax every year. We pay our property tax every year. So in between the US federal census, we are able to piece together our ancestors' lives. Did they move? Do you find them in this part of the county, in the 1862? Do you find them in a different part of the county in 1868? Do you find them in a completely different state in, 1904? So what's really helpful and really important about tax records, are the fact that we can follow families year by year by year. And it can help fill in some of those gaps in between census records, where they are. The ages in the household. One of the things we'll talk about a little bit later is how old do you have to be to pay a tax? So if a name is not in a record, and you go year by year and it's not there and it's not there and it's not there, and then one year it's there, by knowing the law, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too, you can at least guesstimate how old somebody is. And some records, some taxes were paid on households. So there might be, 4 females and 3 males and how old they are. Some have actual names of the people in the household and what might have been paid for them or by them or to them. Types and size of houses. When we get to property tax, we'll see an example and it will tell you how much the house was worth, how much the land was worth. So we were able to follow along. Did our ancestors have a little bit of money? Were they completely broke? Changes in the taxpayer. So if you're following a particular property along and somebody pays a tax, somebody pays, somebody pays, somebody pays, and all of a sudden a different name is paying, there's a change in that household. So there's something we need to research. So these are some of the clues and some of the things that we need to look at when we're looking at tax records. We want to tease out absolutely as much information as we can out of every one of the records that we're able to find. All right, we might not find. So remembering why these records were created in the first place, remembering why the government was collecting money and who they were collecting it from and what kind of paperwork they were creating. If we're looking for this list of people, we might not find any records on them. So for the most part, women didn't pay taxes. The men paid them. So you're generally not going to find a female name in a tax record. Many times veterans didn't have to pay taxes, so you might not find them. Ministers didn't own the property. The church owned the property. So you might find the church paying some sort of a property tax or some sort of something tax, but you may not find the minister. If they didn't own land, if they were sharecroppers or renters or leasing or, traveling around the country and they didn't own land, you're not going to find them in a property tax. A lot of times, older white males, you may not find them. Maybe they no longer own their property. They've passed it down to their kids. Their kids are taking care of them. White people in poverty, and it's white people in poverty because it tended to be white people that had to pay taxes. We'll talk about that a little bit too. So if they were poor, they didn't own anything. And, and what did we say earlier about who pays taxes and how and when they pay them? People that own things, people that have property, people that buy things, people that sell things. And then the enslaved, of course, would not have been paying taxes. So we need to think about the people that we're looking for. We need to build a little bit of a picture of them in our minds and fill in tick some of the little boxes. What sex are they? How wealthy are they? Do they own property? Those types of things are going to help you figure out whether or not it's even worth looking. All right, so then there's laws concerning taxes, and this is really a biggie. It's really important to understand the law when you're looking at tax records. One of the big things, of course, is ages. How old did someone have to be in order to have to pay taxes? How old did someone have to be? Maybe they no longer had to pay a particular tax. So ages are something we need to know from the laws. Marital status. Women that were married, their husband paid taxes. If they were widowed, maybe they were paying the taxes. But again, it depended upon what the law was. And if it was a federal law for federal taxes, or if it's an individual state law for state taxes. And although I'll show you several examples of some of the different taxes, part of what to remember is that I'm showing you specific states and telling you specific things. So if you're in a different state, you're researching a different state, you need to understand the laws in that particular state. The laws also the determining of the wealth or lack of the law surrounding a particular tax. If they had this much property, they had to pay this tax. If they didn't have this much property, they might have to pay a different tax. So by knowing the background and knowing some of those laws, it will help you better interpret some of the records that you're looking at. So where do we find these laws? This was always something. I've gone to a lot of conferences, a lot of NGS conferences, a lot of state conferences, a lot of local genealogy society types conferences. And they all, when I would go to a class that it was appropriate for, they'd all say, you have to know the law. You need to find the law. Go find the law. And then you sit there going, okay, but now what do we do? So what I tried to do was pull out some of the basic places where you will start looking. And then hopefully that will give you clues on other places that you can look as well. So being in North Carolina, the first one I find it's called the North Carolina Digital Collections. And you might want to look to see if your state has something similar. So what NC Digital has done is they've gone through and they've digitized the old law books. So a government would go into session. So the state legislature would go into session. They'd bang the gavel. We're in session now. We're going to start creating laws. And as they made various laws, tax laws, property laws, marital laws, all the laws that a state legislature would make, there's someone sitting on the sidelines taking notes. And then when one of the legislators would propose a specific law, we think that anybody over 18 should pay, $2 a year just to live in the state. Whatever the law might be, they will have written it up and put it in all their legalese language, and then they will do the voting on it. Yes, I think we should. No, think we shouldn't. When the law passes, then it becomes, someone makes, a better copy of it. And then at the end of a legislative session, they will take all those laws that they passed in that particular legislative session, and they create a book out of it. So NC Digital has gone through and digitized a lot of those books so that you can see in, 1802, these were some of the laws that were made in the fall session, or in 1827, these were some of the laws that were made in the spring session. So look to see if your state has any sort of a digital collection like that they may have scanned them for you. The next place I look is law libraries and state universities. So in North Carolina, the University of North Carolina has a whole section of the library that is just full of government records. So it's full of all these old law books. It's full of government publications as they came out year after year after year. So they would publish the book at the end of a session and say, okay, these are all the laws that were passed for this particular session. And then there might be a special session, or there might be a special something that they came back to that they needed to pass extra tax laws. Maybe they started another war, or maybe there was a border thing, or maybe they had to requisition more money for battling the plague or cholera or something. So those extra laws that were passed would be put together in special publications, and you can find those in those libraries as well. So look around your state and see where the law libraries are, and see where the government library is. So in North Carolina, UNC in Chapel Hill is the library in North Carolina that a lot of the government publications come to. So if you're looking for federal laws, and it's not all old stuff. It could be maybe you want to know about tax law from 20 years ago. That's the kind of places that you would go. Another good place to look are government records and state archives. So again, I'm most familiar with North Carolina. I've been here over 30 years, so a lot of my research lately has been North Carolina. But in the state archives, there's a section of the archives that are government records. So as the state of North Carolina publishes whatever type of government records that they've passed, whatever laws they've passed, they send a copy of it to the state archives. State archivists are amazing. They know what they have, they know how to find it, they know where to look. So you want to be sure. Another place to look, of course, is the National Archives. I like to just Google. So I will Google, federal tax law for, 1900 or whatever it is. And NARA is one of the things that comes up that will have guides. They'll tell you how to interpret the laws. They'll tell you how to read the records. They'll tell you where to find actual original. A lot of the records have been microfilmed. So if they're somewhere that you can actually look at them, sometimes they're digitized online. Sometimes you might have to go to one of the regional archives to be able to look at them. But make sure you check out NARA. One of my absolute favorite places to not to look for specific laws, but to understand how to look for laws and how to read them and how to understand them is Judy Russell. She's a legal genealogist. She has a blog. She has a Facebook page. I'm sure most of you are familiar with her. She is constantly speaking somewhere. I was in Ohio, the Ohio Genealogical Society conference last week, and she had 2 or 3 talks there. But she is a retired judge. She very much understands how law and family history intersect and how they're needed, and she's a great resource. The other place that I always look is on FamilySearch, so familysearch.org. And if you go to the search bar, and I'll show you this a little later too, but if you go to the search bar and you go to the research wiki, any of you that aren't familiar with this, when we're done here, go check it out. So if I end up someplace, a place or a type of record that I've never used before, or I don't know where to find it, or I'm not sure what it means, I go to the research wiki. And inside the research wiki, the last time I checked, there were over 80,000 articles. You will not find your people there. You will find sort of the how-tos there. So how do I find tax records? Where are South Dakota's tax records? What was property tax like in California? Those type of questions, there very well could be an article in the wiki that explains where to find the laws and where to find the records themselves. Always check the wiki when you're going someplace new. All right, so here's an example of a law. So this is Pennsylvania, and I just Googled, as you can see up there, I wanted a statute, a tax statute, to give an example, and I looked in Pennsylvania. So you'll see that the website itself is the Pennsylvania General Assembly, and there it's PA Pennsylvania legis.us. So this is sort of an official Pennsylvania law. So this is the 1933 Act, 155, Chapter 2. And what I was looking for were just what's sort of an example of what a law might look like. So this is subjects of local taxation, and these are exemptions. So remember we were talking earlier, an earlier slide that said these people you might not be able to find in records. Well, here are exceptions that Pennsylvania created. So value assessed subjected to taxation for county, city, borough, town, township, school, and poor purposes at an annual rate. And then it goes through and it talks about what's going to be taxed. And if you keep going, and I wasn't going to put the whole thing on the screen, of course, but if you find this and you read all the way down through, there will be places that will say, okay, these particular entities are not subject to this particular tax, which is a good thing to know. I can't find XYZ in these tax records. Well, you're not going to find it because they're one of the things that are exempted. So here's an example of just kind of Googling tax records in Pennsylvania, and this was one of the examples that I came up with. So these are the types of things that you're going to want to look. It's very legal. It's very legalese. Somebody like Judy Russell, of course, can condense it down and make it make more sense. But you can also get help. Once you find a record like this, you can go to your one of your state universities. You can go to one of the law libraries. Find, like around me, there's a law school not that far away from me. So if I run into something like this that I really struggle with, I can send an email to the law school and say, hey, do you have a student that could maybe help me understand what's happening here? Depends on where you live and how friendly the students are, but definitely possibilities of getting help understanding. So this is my example. I'm going to blow this up just a little bit. This is my example of the wiki. So when you go into FamilySearch.org and you go to the search bar and then the wiki bar, and I put Pennsylvania taxation. So I wanted to know more about what kind of resources are out there and where can I find them and how can I use them. So you can see the little blue box here. The blue here are what's in this whole article. I didn't put the whole thing on it, but it talks about online resources. There's a couple paragraphs on why you're going to use them. There's some how to use them at a county level, at a state level. There's a section on what some of the laws might be, and then there's references, like where did this information come from? So as you can see up top, online resources, there's a lot of them. It tells you where you can find them. Some of them are at Ancestry. Some of them are a FamilySearch library. Some of them are FamilySearch, actually, that you can click on and go to. When they're blue like this, that means you can click on them and go to them. It'll take you straight to that record set inside FamilySearch or inside Ancestry. This one would take you to Ancestry. So here's a way to find some of those records, figure out where they are. And once you figure out where they are, then of course you can go in and figure out how to use them. So earlier in the list of history of some of taxes, one of the ones that I put up was the U.S. direct tax list in 1798. So if you remember, these were the taxes that the brand new U.S. government started taxing people to help pay for the Revolutionary War and to help pay off some of the debt that the colonies and the country as a whole had incurred during the war. One of my ancestors is Abraham Fiscus. He was in Westmoreland County in Pennsylvania. So I went to look for him, and I know it's a little blurry, but here it's Fiske. Now we all know, or hopefully we know, or we'll soon learn, that spelling was optional. A lot of people had no clue how to spell their own name. A lot of people in this time frame would have come from countries learning English as a second language. They would have had heavy accents. So the clerk of courts trying to write people's names down wrote what they heard. So the spelling might differ from clerk to clerk as they heard things different, or if a clerk was a native speaker of that person's language, they might know how to spell things. So I worked in a research library, and the researchers in there used to tell me that in the 1700s, 1600s, 1500s, they would tell how well educated you were by how many ways you knew how to spell a word. So if you only knew one way to spell a word, you weren't very well educated. You needed to know 2 or 3 ways to spell a word. So don't let spelling get you concerned. So anyway, here's our Abraham Fiske. This first column talks about who owns the land. Who are we actually necessarily taxing? The DO stands for ditto. So this John Dougherty owned land, Joseph Ford owned land. These people would have rented from them. I know this is really hard to read, but it's the value of the land, it's the value of personal property, and it's telling you how much they owe in taxes. Now, one tax record by itself, all alone, is interesting. And I like to look at them, and I like to see what the numbers are, and I like to see how my guy is doing compared to other guys, his neighbors. Is he doing as well as they are? Is he doing better than they are? But another important part of tax research then is to compare year to year. So what did Abraham do last year? What did Abraham do next year? So when you find this tax record, then you want to find next year's or the year after. You want to see if there's one before. Now there's not one before because this was the year that the law was created. But if you follow down through the years, you can get a really good idea of how your ancestor lived. Were they gradually becoming more affluent? Were they becoming less affluent? Were they kind of holding their own? It's part of that context. It's part of their story. These records aren't as useful. You can see they're in alphabetical order. So there's the E's and the F's and the G's. Some of them some of these lists were made kind of like a census would have been made, where you go up and down the street and, the people come in and you have them in your books based on where they live. Those are really, really useful for Elizabeth Shown Mills fan research. Who are their neighbors? Who are their friends? Who are their acquaintances? Who lives around them? Those types of tax records can really help a lot with neighborhood studies. Is this a wealthy neighborhood? Is this a poor neighborhood? Is this an up-and-coming neighborhood? So what type of people were around your ancestor? Lots of information that can be pulled out of a record. So one of the things we talked about earlier as well was a poll tax. So this is coming out of, see where it says NCDCR? So that's the North Carolina Digital Records. And they have North Carolina poll tax. So we talk about the law. It says poll taxes by definition were taxes on individuals. And since 1715, so again, as we talked earlier, Britain taxed the colonies, and then the colonies also taxed people. People were getting taxed in every direction. So since 1715, North Carolina has passed several laws regarding poll taxes and who's to be taxed. Here's where the law comes in. Generally, the head of the household and any free men living in the household over age 21 were taxable after 1777. That date, that's the other thing you might want to do, is create timelines so you can pay attention to what these dates are. 1777 is a year after 1776. So as the Revolutionary War got started and as we were separating from Britain, North Carolina had to have more money, had to have its own taxes. 1970, poll taxes in North Carolina were abolished. So what I'm showing you here is a table of taxable ages from 1715. I'm only have 1781 here. It goes on through 1970. So here's what I was talking about earlier as well. Laws before 1777 can be found in volume 23 of Colonial and State Records. This is the North Carolina Digital site. That blue means you can click on it. So if you want to know what happens after 1777, you can click on that colonial and state records and it will take you to those books that we were talking about earlier, that you can read the actual law and see for yourself what it says. So laws before 1777 to now it's a different link, but you're still getting the same basic idea, North Carolina government docs. And it's interesting to see. And it's important that we understand these ages. If you're going to follow along year to year, who's taxed this year, who's taxed next year, who's taxed the year after, you need to know these ages. So in 1715, the age was 16. And poll taxes were taxes on individuals. So enslaved people 12 and older, the enslaver would have had to pay taxes on any of his people that were 12 and older, 16 and over, 16 and over. And as you look down, 1777, it changed to 21. And there's one of the exemptions. If you had less than 100 pounds worth of property, or if you were a continental soldier, then you did not have to pay the poll tax. And women no longer had to pay any type of poll tax. And then 1777, all enslaved people, you would have had to pay a poll tax on them. So you can see how the law changes over time. That's going to change what you're reading inside those records as you're reading them. So it's really important for whatever year tax you're looking at, that you make sure you understand what the law is and what these ages are and what the exemption is. 1778, married men and less than 100 pounds. So, there's just different exemptions as you go through different years. And you don't want to misread the record that you're looking at because you don't know that the law changed for that particular time frame. So this is examples of the law for poll taxes for North Carolina. All right, so here's another poll tax. The actual tax. This comes from FamilySearch. So there's search, and you go into the catalog, and this is Dallas County, Alabama. So here's a list of the men. You'll notice that these are all men. The year that they registered. So whatever year they were that they moved into the county or that they were now old enough in the county. And across the top here are years. So it goes, 1920s, 1930s up through 1940s. And then there's just the notes. Who paid, how much they paid, why they didn't pay. Like old George here paid in Montgomery County from 1940 to 1942. So he wouldn't have had to pay in Dallas County. But knowing who these men were and what they were paying and why they were paying can help you. Again, back to that context, we're rounding out these men's lives. We're learning more about them. We're, figuring out, here's an age, so a birth date, the year that they registered. So we're able to understand a little more about their lives as we're looking through these poll records. Maryland excise tax. I've got this in here. I don't have an actual record because when I went looking for an actual excise record, this is what I found in Maryland. So from 1746 to 1767, they have records of the excise taxes collected on liquor imports by county officials. So anybody that imported liquor, imported alcohol, would have had to pay a tax on it. There's the location within the archives, there's the number that you would need, there's the citation that you would need. And as you can see up here, one of the tabs is how to place an order. So I included this one to show you that everything's not online. You're not going to just be able to push buttons and do searches and Google your way around and boom, here's this record that I want to see. For this particular record, if this is a time frame and a place that's important to me, I'm going to have to place an order. I'm going to have to send them a little bit of money and then they will send me the record that I can look at it. So don't expect to be able to find all this stuff online all the time. There's a really good chance on especially very specialized records like excise records. You're going to have to order a record. They're not going to be something that pops up for you. All right. So that 1862, the Civil War tax that was placed in order to help pay for the war. This is another family search record. Here, you need to pay attention to districts. So when I looked up this act and I looked up Pennsylvania, this is Fayette County, it said District 21. So when I went looking for microfilm, I went looking for District 21. So here they are. Folks on Fayette County are over here. This Jacob Sipe is my ancestor. You can see their residence. One way of making sure you have your person is making sure that they're in the right town. Again, timelines. Where was your guy in 1863? Well, my guy was in Springfield Township, so there he is. So then you can see that none of these, there's no descriptions, there's no values for any of this, but Jacob, when you come over, follow him over, he had 4, and I'm having trouble reading this. The guy above him had 30 calf skins. This guy had 92 pounds of leather, sole leather. I'm not sure what that reads, but he had to pay $30, or it was the 30 was the rate, and then he paid $1.20 in taxes. So $1.20 is what's owed altogether. So it's interesting, if you can interpret the handwriting, is to go down through and see what it was that was being taxed. So all of these are goods: leather, hemp, cattle. So that's a way of figuring out what your ancestor owned. What did he have, and what was being taxed? Again, this is a place where the law would come in really handy to go back into this particular Internal Revenue assessment and see what the law is, see what it is that they're taxing. All right, I've got this one because we talked earlier about who is being taxed. So this is an assessment tax. This is property. And we talked about the fact that you're not going to find women, but here is Ann Tissue. And the WID here is widow. So Ann's husband has passed away, but just because he's gone, that doesn't take away his tax obligation or the obligation on the property. So Ann is now in here as a widow. Again, going back and forth and back and forth. So if I go to the year before, is Ann still a widow? If I go to the year before, is Ann still a widow? How many years do I have to go back before Ann's not there anymore, but her husband is? Then that gives you a possible death date. So at that point, that year, then you know to go looking for death records. You know, to go looking for land records and probate records that can help you identify more closely when he actually passed. So there's some more context. You're able to use a tax record to find a possible death date when Ann became a widow. Now, a little bit of caution here. They were rather liberal with the use of the word widow, which is perfectly understandable. Women didn't want to put in official records that they had been abandoned or that they were divorced or separated. So sometimes they would put widowed because they didn't want to acknowledge what the real situation was. So as you go back through the records, you want to see where he disappeared. Like I said, it might be a death, but it also just might be, you know, he went to California for the gold rush and has never come home. So you can't assume a death, but it's a place to start and it's a thing to think about. And then looking at the amounts, you know, some of these people were in the hundreds and had no acres, and she had one lot that was valued at $50. She had 2 cows that were valued at $20. So she really didn't have a lot compared to what a lot of these men around her had. And then I would want to go forward. I want to see next year. Does she still have 2 cows? Maybe she has 3 cows by then. And you can trace her well-being as you trace through these tax records. All right, poll taxes. This is a North Carolina poll tax. This is just names. So here's a 1902 poll tax. All these men. all these men, all these men. There is nothing, it looks like there's nothing of genealogical value here, but again, I want to go back and see what those laws were. That table that we looked at earlier, what's the age in 1902 that you had to be in order to pay a poll tax? So you know all these men are older than that age. They're alphabetical, so that doesn't help with neighborhoods. But who else is there? This first one, there's a whole bunch of Duncans here. Are they related? Are they all kin of some sort? There's a couple more Duncans down here. So are they people were they family groups? So are these more names, more initials that you can be looking for? Other family members that maybe you don't know about, or other family members that came and went or haven't gone anywhere, or whatever the case may be. But by carefully studying these names and trying to put these families together, you may find ancestors or siblings of ancestors that you didn't know anything about. All right, inheritance tax. So this again is FamilySearch. So here, Mrs. Walter Cates has passed. Value of real estate, $60,000. This would be something that would then, and this is 1926. So if she had $60,000 in 1926, she was well off. This is one of those clues to other records. So we know she died in 1926. She's in Alamance County, North Carolina. I want her probate file. I want her records, her deed records, the land that was bought and sold. She had $6,000 worth of personal property. Was there an auction? Was there a will? Her estate paid $549 in estate taxes. You can see they were paid. One was in 25, one was in 26. So what that says is that she died before this date. So she died earlier in 25. They probably took a while to assess the property. So the taxes were paid in two parts as things were assessed. You can see the people that signed. You can see the dates. You can see the estate, Rawhut, C.F. Rawhut. Mrs. Walter Cates was the executor. So there's a lot of information. One of the things I would want to know is what's the relationship between Cates and Rawhut? Maybe a daughter, since it's a last name difference, maybe a cousin, maybe a next door neighbor. I just worked with someone that he had no heirs, so the next door neighbor was the person doing all of this stuff. But again, this builds context around this man's life, what he owned, where he owned it, how much he owned. Are there deeds? Did he own other property? Is there a will? So who else was in his life? And again, who are these two people? How are they related? I'd want to know that. I don't know if you're aware, but FamilySearch has been pulled out what they call full text searching. And I'll show you on the next page how to find it. But in their full text AI searching, I put tax and I put Fayette County, Pennsylvania, and then I just screenshotted a couple that came up. So in these records, Fayette, Pennsylvania, account records 1850 to 1860, you can see some names. There's a road tax. There's a school tax. There's an orphans court tax. There's another road tax. There were 18 matches inside these records for the word tax. So you would click on the name here and those records would be pulled up, and then you would be able to read each of these to see if they were anyone that you wanted. You can put a name in here. They're keywords, so you can put what you want in to try to pull out what you want. But I just wanted to see what other kind of tax records were in Fayette County. So we never even talked about road taxes or school taxes or an orphans court tax. So there are a lot more taxes, but we only have so much time. So I can only talk about a few of them. The sheriff's deed book, 1787 to 1875. There's a county tax and a road tax. Fayette County, another road tax, another county tax. So there's lots of tax records kind of hidden away in places that we might not think to look at. So the slide I had before was where you can find laws, places that you would go to try to find the law on how these taxes were created and what they were for and ages and all that sort of good stuff. Where do you find the actual tax records? Well, the usual suspects, Ancestry, of course, and FamilySearch. We talked about the NC Digital Library. I found the one in the Maryland State Archives, Pennsylvania State Archives, NARA. So the actual tax records are going to be in these places as well. FamilySearch.org/labs is where you're going to find that full text AI searchability that FamilySearch is working on. That's one of the things that you need to go back, because what you find today, 2 weeks from now, they'll have more. And 2 weeks after that, they'll have more. They first opened up this lab about a year and a half ago, and there were maybe 1,000 record sets in there. I think they told me the other day there are over 10,000 record sets. Don't hold me to that number, but it's a huge number compared to what it was a year ago, and they're adding record sets every year. So that's definitely something you want to check out. And then, of course, the research wiki we talked about. You want to make sure that you're checking there. And as I also said earlier, just Google the type of tax you want to look at, the state that you want to look at it in, and all kinds of interesting things can come up. Places to find the law, places to find the actual original tax record, places to find explanations of the taxes that you're looking for. So there is my What a Wonderful World taxes are. I wanted to leave some time if there's questions that hopefully I'll be able to answer. Are there questions?
Yes, there are.
Uh-oh.
Let's see. Okay, so the first question somebody was asking about sole leather. We just say it's like a thicker leather for the bottom shoes or heavy bags.
The what?
Sole leather.
Oh, yes. What it is?
Yeah.
It's just what it sounds like. It's the leather from the cows to make soles on shoes.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question, how did records differ in North Carolina counties for people who died intestate?
How do they differ? Good question. They would, again, it would depend on the law for the county. And if it was a statewide law or if it was a particular county law, but generally it's a state law. And so North Carolina intestate law says that, the wife, if the spouse dies, the spouse gets everything. If there's no spouse, the kids get everything. If there's no kids, siblings get everything. So there's a hierarchy of who's next to inherit. And when you get there, it stops. If there's a spouse, the kids, don't necessarily get anything. If there's no spouse, but there's kids, siblings wouldn't get anything. But that would be a state law that you'd want to look for.
Great, thank you. Someone was asking, specifically in places like Philadelphia, in the early 1880s, how soon after an immigrant arrives are they taxed?
As soon as they have anything to be taxed. If they buy a house, if they buy a cow, if they buy a whatever, depending, of course, on what Philadelphia tax laws are. And again, we're back to tax law. But depending on what Philadelphia tax laws are, generally you have to own something. Or a poll tax, if Philadelphia still had poll taxes. If you wanted to vote, you would have had to pay a tax then. So there's no 3 days or 6 months or anything like that. It's when do they acquire something that needs to be taxed?
Okay. There was a question earlier that I asked the person who asked to clarify, but I could kind of go over it. Somebody was wondering if, with your experience in Pennsylvania records, if you can shed any light on the Susquehanna Company land records and the title to the PA land that the Connecticut people took/bought after the Pennant War. I think they're asking where would you find records relating to all that drama?
Yeah, I would start with the Pennsylvania archives. I would start at the archives with their archivists. The other place would be to pick the specific county that you're interested in and look at the county's, either their historical society or their public library, and get someone there, but I'd start at the state archives.
Well, I don't see any more questions in here. So,
Whoa.
yeah.
I either put them all to sleep or I told them everything. I'm not sure
I think
which.
you might have told them everything because there was a lot of content, which was great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. This was great. Oh, wait, one more question. How does the state handle someone not paying tax? They're indigent and was buried in a pauper's grave. They're not.
Well, chances are they wouldn't owe any tax if they were paupers or they had nothing. They're indigent. They wouldn't owe any taxes. Flip side of that, if they do owe taxes and they don't pay, the same way they handle it now. You know, you go to court, you go to prison, yeah.
Great.
Again, go back to those laws and see what's actually owed.
Great. Okay. So I think that's it. So thank you again, Michelle.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you. This has been fun. I enjoy.
Great. Well, everybody, if you would like a copy of this chat, send us an email. Our email is genealogy@acpl.info. I put in the chat a couple times. Okay. And I hope all of you enjoy the rest of your day.
Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Great. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.